Hello and welcome to this episode of the Digital Disruption Podcast with myself, Chris Williams, and my esteemed colleague, Pete Gatenby. We are not in the usual setting, although I am to a certain extent due to COVID. But there we go. Pete, how are we?
All right, thank you. All right, I thought COVID was a thing of the past, but here we are. Maybe we could stay warm on this damp Monday evening.
Good stuff. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about bridging the strategic disconnect in digital transformation, fresh out the back of our last episode where we talked about horizontal digital integration, or HDI, and how that is fundamentally impacting the home buying and selling market. This episode, we're going to be really digging into how not understanding HDI in its entirety and interoperability can and will cause a strategic disconnect. So let's get into it.
So Chris, strategic disconnect, for anyone out there who could probably make a stab at what their understanding is, but let's just break it down for our listeners. What is strategic disconnect?
I guess in simple terms, it's when there's a gap between the core strategic goals of an organisation and that of the implementation teams, people that are responsible for ultimately delivering on that strategy. Now, in the context of digital and in the context of the home buying and selling sector, what we can see is that the businesses that are thriving and really progressing and pushing forward is that their technological capabilities, their technical teams and their business units, number one, are incredibly aligned and work collectively together. And number two, the actual implementation of those strategic objectives and goals is unequivocally clear, and they know the direction of travel, especially when it comes to interoperability. And so if there's a disconnect between the strategic objectives and that of the delivery teams, obviously that inherently is going to cause significant issues. Now, what we do see in this industry sector, however, is that an executive team, say in lending organisations, can have a very clear picture of overall what it is that they want to achieve. But if fundamentally they don't understand the strategic importance of interoperability and that horizontal digital integration, which is essentially moving from a vertical model into a horizontal digital integrated model which connects the home buying ecosystem up. If that isn't understood by the exec fundamentally, and that isn't transitioning into delivery teams, then we're going to have significant challenges. And we're starting to see that with organisations that have got a very vertical strategic approach to digitalisation of their work streams and not necessarily looking left and right.
So what typically causes a strategic disconnect?
The big one really is probably obvious, and it's poor communication. I mean, when I think about our organisation as a consulting business, and one of our core service lines is that of strategic consulting, one of the critical things we have to do once you kind of help define that strategy is support an organisation in communicating that and what that ultimately means to the organisation. And what it means to the business at a high level, at a holistic level, can mean different things at an implementation layer. So the big one is, and it seems obvious, but it's poor communication. It's translating what that means to the individual teams that have to collectively deliver against that strategy. That's the first thing. And that often comes from leadership and poor operational structures. That's the big one. Communication, fairly obvious, but how does that communication not happen in the organisation? Usually it's because of the way the business is configured to translate that message. Bearing in mind that we operate in a world now which is incredibly quick and fast, you've got to have your organisation configured to be able to adapt and move quickly. So as that strategy overall remains ultimately the same, we want to be interoperable. We want to kind of connect the ecosystem up. We've got to do some really good things to drive down those transaction times, or whatever the key KPIs are. You've got to be able to translate that into the business quickly, and things are going to move quickly. New vendors, different technology stacks, AI, things are going to move quickly. So you've got to be able to fundamentally communicate that overreaching message to the key areas.
You ever see there's a bit of a lack of buy-in as well, if you've got the wrong people in the wrong seats, or...
Yeah, and I think this again comes down to communication. So if you can't get buy-in from the workforce, and this actually, traditional consulting businesses would consult to organisations at an executive level. And the message often is you've got to get this into the workforce. I mean, digital transformation, or the digital transformation graveyard, is full of excuses of it wasn't translated into the workforce properly, and therefore that lack of buy-in from the workforce caused the problem. Actually, I invite people to turn that on its head, because there's lessons that can be learned from both success and failure. And if we look at the failures of the past in big transformation programs, often it's actually been the failings of executives, not failings of implementation teams, to actually communicate effectively. And they've not necessarily bought in. They've kind of, said all the right things, but in terms of the actions and how that business has been augmented and orchestrated to deliver, that's been different. So buy-in is a big one, but often that's blamed on implementation teams. But actually, it's actually more about the executive unit and leadership. So leadership needs to communicate, leadership needs to take those people on the journey. But they've got to be able to translate that vision effectively and with impact so that the workforce can buy into it, because buy-in's a big one.
Yeah, and I think I've seen it quite recently, actually, where even when you've had that communication, actually what's lacked behind as part of the digital transformation program is actually operational improvements at either the product delivery level or the operations that sit around it. And so you end up with this kind of almost siloed approach where everyone sort of understands what needs to happen and what we're trying to achieve, but actually the departments themselves are not operationally set up. The processes out there to support the transformation that needs to happen, and that leads to silos, but also really poor cross-departmental collaboration. You don't have the right people in the the product discovery. You don't have the different departments bought in because they're not set up to. They're not encouraged to. They understand the vision and the journey that everyone's on, but it's not part of their job to be part of the transformation itself. And so I've seen that one quite recently, actually. It's an interesting one.
Yeah, and I think what you've just described there also goes outside of the business. So if we look at the home buying and selling sector, the mortgage market holistically as a whole, it's in a period of mass transformation and change. Yeah. There's lots of great things happening, and a big enabler of those movements, if you like, for want of a better phrase, is collaboration. And what's enabling that collaboration is that way of working. It's that mindset. It's that openness and that transparency that you've described, and the way that, people are brought together. So if you're not doing that inside your business, the highly likelihood is that you're not actually contributing to it outside of your organisation, which is probably also holding you back. And in a highly competitive environment, that can be very damaging. So I think what you've just articulated there, Pete, is one, really important, but not just from an internal perspective. That needs to kind of feed outside the business too, because partnerships are a critical success factor over the next 3 to 5 years for many organisations in this space.
And we've seen it already, right, in the marketplace. Like, those that are winning and getting ahead of the curve are collaborating well with other partners in the industry. Those are lagging behind, doing things in isolation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I would describe those businesses as smart and progressive. And I think that would be the invitation to people watching and listening to this, is you've got to be smart and you've got to be progressive. And in order to kind of be those two things, understanding that end-to-end collaborative piece, understanding that, are we disconnected strategically as an organisation between what it is that we're saying to the world and actually what it is that we're doing in our implementation teams? Have we got those checkpoints? And I guess that's an important one to touch on. It's health check. How do you health check a business in these states? Because it's actually really important to continuously run those health checks. And it seems a bit woolly and a bit woo-woo sometimes, but actually high-performing businesses have got fantastic health check touch points on their transformation journeys, and they're able to kind of see, exactly what happens. So it'd be good maybe for us to spend a couple of minutes just kind of talking about that, to give some tips and tricks on, what do those health checks kind of look like? I know you've been involved in some of those before, especially when looking at assessing organisations to take them on that transformation journey. What do you think are some of the sort of key things that they should be doing as part of that health check to ensure that they've not got that strategic disconnect and they can continue to, grow and improve?
Well, I think there's a number of things that you can do to I guess health check, temperature check, whatever the verbiage is that are used within your organisation. The first is benchmark where you are today internally. That is from, it could be from a technical standpoint, it could be from a progressive standpoint, it could be from any which way. But you got to benchmark your capabilities, because at the end of the day, we are digital businesses that happen to operate in the home buying arena, and so we need to assess our capabilities from a delivery standpoint, also from an operational standpoint, and start to score those. We can benchmark them internally, see where we are today versus tomorrow, see if we're moving forward iteratively. But equally, we should start to benchmark ourselves against our competitors, our peers, other people within the market, especially as HDI, horizontal digital integration, is really starting to take hold. Peers are just as important, because if you're technologically lacking behind, a partner who you may want to work with, they're very quickly going to be either A, frustrated, B, no longer want to collaborate with you, or C, accelerate way ahead of where you're able to keep up, and you'll be left behind anyway. So that's one way, but there's many methodologies around this. But
I think the other one is staff, isn't it? Is people. It's important to do health checks on people. I once worked with a great coach that we, parachuted into a business a couple of years ago, who was really good at this in terms of kind of running health checks with particularly technology teams, and ensuring that kind of, where they were on that kind of transformation journey and how they were kind of interacting with the business and all other areas. That's definitely another one. I think something else that is worth kind of touching on at this point is how to ensure that kind of the technology investments align with the strategic goals, because it's all well and good having that great sort of strategy, where we're going to play, how we're going to win, what does that product category look like, what does that product strategy look like. But if you've not fundamentally got the technology investment aligned to that, that's going to cause problems. So, like, what are your kind of top things to people watching and listening to this to avoid that common trap?
So how would I ensure that the investments really align? It's going to be around either A, clearly defining those strategic goals, B, putting in the correct KPI and metrics so that you can say, right, have we been successful in achieving our strategic goals? Have we made the right investment? But equally, start small. Start with pilot, proof of concept, get something out there that's low investment, and you can measure success quite quickly to justify further investment. In years gone by, we would spend months, if not years, developing a business case to get a sign off for a big landmark program of work. That's not really how the world works today. It's all about iterating quickly, testing concepts, and moving forward with the winners. And it's a much better investment of time, rather than having people putting spreadsheets and presentations together to get budget sign off. Refocus and reallocate that spend on getting the pilot out the door and measuring the success. But equally, you need to align your strategic, but also your operational strategy that sits around that. But your strategic objectives and your operational strategy align both that from a technology standpoint and a business standpoint. They can't be at odds. We worked with so many businesses who, when you get under the hood, their technology and their product teams are at odds with the broader business because of how they work, their cultures, how they communicate. This even goes down to tooling. It's literally, so in terms of how delivery teams sometimes want to communicate, they want to be in Slack, but the business is on Teams. Like, it's a fundamental difference. You need to align. Doesn't mean that we need to switch from one to the other, but we need to understand why. There's a reason teams of people want to be on a different tooling or do things in a different way. They're not just doing it just to be difficult. There's often reasons, but you can get into the crux of that and then align the two parties. Then you can move forward and be much more successful.
I think that really also touches on the importance of speed. Now, I know that pretty much on every episode we emphasizing move quickly, speed really matters. And everybody kind of gets it, but not everybody's really good at keeping or maintaining that pace of speed. And I think something I'd like to raise at this junction is almost the example of people, organisations and groups of people within organisations taking way too long to make decisions. And I think that one of the best ways to make a decision is to understand, is this a one-way door or is this a two-way door? I.e., if the decision that we're making right now, if we go on with this decision, can we reverse out of it quickly, yes or no? And I think when you get into that kind of mindset, if the answer is yes, make the decision quickly and know you can get out of it, because all the kind of bravado and personalities and strong personalities, kind of all that gets blown out of the window, and it's fundamentally about, can we make this boat go faster? Yes or no? Will this decision make this boat go faster? Well, it might do. Well, let's make it and test it and then get out of it if it doesn't. Obviously, with one-way door decisions, you've got to be much more careful about that, because obviously there's a lot at stake. But certainly in my experience, I'm sure I can say in our experiences, there's very, 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 very few one-way doors. And I think that that's a big, big thing that a lot of companies can get wrong sometimes, is they spend inordinate amounts of time, I'm going to be blunt now, fannying about making decisions and actually...
That wasn't the F word I thought you were going to use there.
Yeah, I've been known to use stronger ones, but we've both seen it, where there's so much time and energy is wasted on arguing about whether should we do this or should we do that, where really it's just a case of, well, let's just score this quickly and take a call on it. And I think companies with, especially, we're talking about sort of that strategic alignment here. I think this is often where companies can kind of get themselves caught up, really, because they've implemented quite matrix structures to be much more agile and introduce agile and lean ways of working. And because of that, there's almost a lack of hierarchy for somebody to come in and go, I'll make the call, because it's almost decision by committee rather than somebody just kind of going for it. And that's a really hard balance to strike, because culturally you're trying to implement this kind of, open way of doing things and collaborative way of doing things. But sometimes somebody just has to make a decision. And I think culturally, when we talk about technology alignment, strategic alignment, ways of working, and ensuring there isn't a strategic disconnect, culturally, it's really important to embed those kind of behaviours in your teams. What is this, a one-way door or a two-way door? Make decisions quickly and know that it's okay for that to be the wrong decision, as long as you can back out of it and we're on to the next thing quickly that was the right one. And I think that's a really important point to make at this juncture, because I think often people get that wrong.
Oh, absolutely. Nothing's ever forever, especially in the digital space. It's... I've seen this discussion solved once by implementing the most complicated feature flag delivery approach ever, but it allowed us to flick things on and off at the click and button, which therefore mitigated the risk that a very risk-averse organisation needed to abide by. But that's the level you can go to satisfy this. Just to say, well, look, it's not forever. We test it, it don't work, we turn it off again.
Yeah. I think that's a good segue to actually kind of, as we draw to a close on this particular topic, really, is risks. What are the risks of, not responding in this way, not configuring a business, not having strategic alignment? I think we can both probably throw out a few of these. I think a big one for me, and the biggest risk, is if you're not configured in the right way for your organisation to really strive in terms of digital delivery today in the home buying and selling market, whether you're a lender, vendor, law, wherever you sit in the ecosystem, you are at high risk of being massively disrupted by incumbents, competitors that exist today. But actually, there's a new class of providers that are coming into this sector who are cloud first enabled. They can see that everything's a two-way door. They're going to test and deploy much quicker than you. I think that's probably one of the biggest risks is disruption.
Yeah, because it slows you down, right? And there's wastage. You can talk about kind of wastage of significant resources, from people's time to money to missed opportunity. There's just wastage across the process. And with this strategic disconnect, everything just takes forever, it drags on. So
we've got competitive disadvantage and disruption.
Yep.
Internal people becoming disenfranchised, leaving quickly. Because if you're not kind of competing out there, if you're not deploying quickly, if you're using old hat methods and kind of still fannying about, as I said earlier, making decisions over like inane things, you're going to lose good people to organisations if you kind of are doing things properly. So, it's not easy, this. So there's some of the big risks that are out there, definitely. And I think that employee disengagement piece is probably the one that I'd probably conclude on from a risk standpoint. Don't underestimate that. We are definitely in a world where resources are scarce, where, in this sector especially, it's great to have people, good people, that you can scale with. And I think organisations are getting to a point now where they're kind of thinking, right, there's some businesses out there that are on the real cusp of doing some great things, and they need to begin to scale. You can't scale if you haven't got the people.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. And then the flip side, I think my final point would be the knock-on impact down the track is actually on your customer experience, customer journey.
With a title like Strategic Disconnect, which has obviously been the title of this podcast today, it's very much focused on the businesses that are trying to deliver services to this market and their strategies. But actually, fundamentally, those strategies impact an end consumer that is poorly, the experience is poor. There's no question about it at the moment. Yeah. Individually, at certain aspects of the life cycle of buying or selling a property, some of it's got better, but fundamentally, it still takes on average 160 to 200 days to transact. That's a poor customer experience. There's no other way of doing it. There's a reason why it's kind of the third most stressful thing behind divorce and death to do. How do we change that? Well, get these things right that we try to talk about each week on this particular podcast. And that most definitely will help the customer experience, because at the heart of this is somebody just trying to buy or sell a house.
Yeah, and it should be exciting, right? But it's just not at the moment.
So to wrap up the podcast today, we've covered the importance of strategic disconnect and ultimately what that means to organisations going through digital transformation in the home buying and selling space, and specifically where horizontal digital integration, or HDI, sort of plays a role in that. Fundamentally, a strategic disconnect in digital transformation is ultimately going to result in a poor customer experience, poor staff experiences, and massive risks at a competitive level. So hopefully the things that we've discussed in the podcast are going to be useful and beneficial to yourself. As ever, if there's anything that we've been discussing today that you'd like to find out more about, don't hesitate to reach out to ourselves here at Novus Strategy and Consulting. Finally, I would just like to say our newsletter, which is a printed newsletter, which will arrive on your doorstep of choice, is now available. Edition 1 is now available. And if you would like it, somewhere around this video will be a download or a link for you to go and register your name and address, and that will be posted and sent out to you. It's a free newsletter. It's for people in the industry. So do get in touch if you're interested in getting a copy. But for now, thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week in our usual self, not on a Teams call due to COVID. And we will crack on from there. But for now, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like and share, and we will see you again very soon.
Yes, guys.